All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Friday free for all. Of course, that means you call in. We have calls every day. So what's really different about Friday? It's just that I guess there's that, what is it, where the sounds, alliteration, Friday free for all. So got a little alliteration there with the consonant, so that's why we call it that. But also, kind of trying to revisit topics, looking at what we talked about during the week, what responses, if any. And I got quite a bit of responses this week to some of the conversations we've had. So I want to share the reactions that people have had, and also maybe some articles I've read or commentary I've observed that relates to what we've been discussing this week, even if it's not specific to that. In other words, maybe it's a sort of the same topic, but it isn't responding directly to what I've said. So we'll get to that, all of it today. It is the free-for-all again, 240-242-5646. Powerful program yesterday. I don't want to just pretend it didn't, ignore it. Obviously, it was, it's heartbreaking to hear what Muhammad had to tell us about what his life is like, what his family's life is like in Gaza right now under Israeli occupation, under Israeli siege, under Israeli bombardment, and the weapons Israel is using, our government, the United States, has supplied to Israel. It is heartbreaking. It's absolutely the crime of this century, in my opinion. I've talked about this, and, again, you don't want to compare atrocities, and I always find that a little bit frustrating. But the fact that the United States, the most powerful nation the world has ever seen, is fully behind this these atrocities, to me, puts this in a different realm from what we've seen before. You have to go back to the Nazi Holocaust, I think, to see something quite on this level. And, if you want to take issue with that, look, death is death. You die, it's awful. You're suffering, it's awful. It doesn't really, in the end, make that much difference who's creating it, who's causing it. But when a country that at least likes to perceive itself, whose residents, the Americans, we want to see ourselves, and people like Hillary Clinton would say we're exceptional people. This was something that, of course, Reagan used as his kind of argument, it's morning in America, we're special, we're great, rather than dwelling, as he claimed, that Democrats and liberals do, on our shortcomings. I think what those of us who point out the way America has failed to live up to its promises, what we're trying to do is make life better. We're just trying to make things a little better for people who don't have enough, who are victims, who are being oppressed, persecuted, hurt, taken advantage of. That's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do here. Gratified to see growth, by the way, in the Facebook group that we have. Maybe I'll promote that first rather than the subscribe now. Halitics on Facebook. Love to see more people join there. Want to see the back and forth, the conversation. Sometimes I'm not always as involved in it because I have, rather see what you have to say. I don't always feel the need to comment if my point is being made by somebody else, but I certainly do keep a close eye on Halitics on Facebook. This is really my baby, this program, and I want to talk to you whenever you can get a chance to call in and you feel that you have something to add to the conversation. And you probably have something to add, even if you don't think you do. So if I say something, you hear something that you find frustrating, you find exciting, you find exhilarating, you find absurd, please share. Do definitely subscribe if you haven't yet done so. Like our videos, engage. That's the way, by the way, people always use that expression. You cut through the algorithm, you beat the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm. I mean, a huge part of how Google decides, Alphabet decides that it's going to promote certain videos and put them in people's feeds that maybe they haven't seen before, who haven't necessarily subscribed, is the commentary, is the engagement, whether it's a like or a subscription by you, or it's a comment. All of that helps us. Israel kills 15 Palestinians in Gaza, so relatively less deadly day. I mean, that's where we are right now, is when only 15 people die or are killed, or at least are found to have been killed by Israel. That's considered a good, quote, day. So that's a positive. I have no idea why that number is much lower than we've seen in recent days when it's often above 100. 10 of those, as Israel continues the humanitarian crime, the crime against humanity, where it shoots at starving people it has actually been starving, right? Keeping from getting food, preventing food from entering the enclave. And then when they show up for a hand, for something, for a handout, because they have no other options, no other way to eat, they get sometimes a ladle full of lentils or some rice, and other times they get a bullet in the head. That is what Israel does. Over 60 injured as Israeli fire targets Palestinians waiting for aid amid worsening humanitarian crisis. Of the 15 killed, 10 were seeking aid. So they're not Hamas. Like Israel's, they're Hamas. No, they're not. They're women, they're children, they're men. They're just people. They're human beings. And we spoke to one of those human beings yesterday, Muhammad, and learned just how terrible life is. All right. 240-242-5646. I was really taken when I asked Muhammad yesterday, do you still have faith in humanity? And I didn't know what he was going to say. I really had no idea. I suspected, people will say things that they think someone wants to hear, like, oh, yes, there are still good people like you. But that kind of broke him down. I mean, he just acknowledged, no, it's just awful. And we're just under constant bombardment. You could feel hear the tears and just the sense of hopelessness that the United States government and Israel have reduced the people of Gaza to, the millions of Gazans, if there are even 2 million left after the mass murder committed by Israel there. It's just awful. I mean, do I have faith in humanity? I actually do, as I mentioned yesterday to Jay. I think what makes this so awful, what makes this such a terrible, terrible crime is, yes, there are really good people out there. There are absolutely caring, loving, decent people. Even sometimes the worst people in some areas, in some ways, are good people. I was thinking about this with respect to Barack Obama. Barack Obama did so much harm, and I can totally get and I'm not going to get into all the details. I just don't feel like doing that right now. And I totally get the people who just, wash their hands of him and of Democrats in general and just say they're all sociopaths, just like, Trump is, just like W was. And even W, look, the guy's an artist. Apparently he's a relatively talented painter. I mean, certainly a lot more talent than I've seen some of his what he's drawn or painted. It's pretty impressive. It's a hell of a lot better than anything I could ever do. Even someone like W, even a torturer, right, has this artistic sensibility inside of him. So that's what makes this so awful, is that we're doing these crimes to good people. And even some of them, the people behind it, I don't want to say they're good, because good people do good things, bad people do bad things. George W. Bush did really, really bad things, and many of them. But it appears that there's also some decency inside of him, love for his family. We've seen that, right? For his daughters. I mean, they turned out pretty well. And I would say the same for Obama. It's pretty hard to find the good in Trump, right? If there's much there. I mean, but he did say, he absolutely said, I want them not to die, when he was talking about the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And I believe him. I believe that. This is from, speaking of Trump, but let's give the number, the slide here. We'll just show it, and then we'll get to something that the White House is sending out there. It's kind of interesting, I guess. Trump is Superman, right? Because there's this new Superman movie, and so I think the new thing is Trump as Superman. It's kind of interesting, I guess. I mean, a friend of mine shared it with me and said that he knows it's designed to trigger libs, and he himself is triggered. We'll show it in a minute, but just here's the slide. 15 people, and that was Friday. That was today, according to Anadolu Ajansi. Those 15 were killed today. So I was trying to figure out if there were more yesterday. The number they had is approaching 57,800. So I added the 15 to the total we had yesterday, which was 57,763, and you add 15 to that, you get 57,78. Added the 15 to what I had for Trump Netanyahu's victims, the people who they've killed, for whose deaths they are responsible. So that's where I got those numbers: 7,218 Gazans, over 3,500 women and children likely, since we know that a majority of Israel's victims are women and children. It is what it is. It's a horrible, horrible crime that we're observing and that we're complicit in to a significant degree. I mean, I like to think I'm not. I did vote for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is one of the prime architects of this crime. He never, ever told Israel to stop. Remember, that's what, was it Herzog? Some Israeli minister said, hey, I got to give Biden credit. He and his administration never once told us to stop. I got this from a friend of mine, shared this on social. Well, I guess it wasn't really so. I don't know what you call it. It was a text, right? It was a text to a small group that I'm in. And I'm not going to give you the comment that they made, but I will share it with you verbally. So they said, hey, I know this is being shared to trigger us, and I'm triggered. And I have to say, I'm not. I think this is hilarious. I really do. The White House, the symbol of hope, truth, justice. I mean, it's such a joke, right? Super Trump, super Tramp, whatever. Call him what you like. I mean, come on. Really? Does this real? I mean, even not even his rabid followers. And if you're one of them, if you like Trump, if you're a Trumper, whatever you want to call it, I've been called the Trumpanzee, right? Because when I used to criticize Hillary, I had Facebook friends who were, diehard libs, lib dems, whatever you want to call them. I used to call myself a liberal, and I think I still am a liberal. The term has kind of been co-opted, but people who were, just completely supportive of the Democrat Party. These were privileged people making good money, lots of money, living in Manhattan in nice apartments, not struggling, and they just hated the criticisms that I lodged against Hillary Clinton online. It just triggered them to an extraordinary degree. And they would call me a Trumpanzee. That was the term that was used, even though, of course, I never supported Trump, didn't vote for Trump, didn't tell people to vote. No, but apparently just by pointing out Hillary's manifold, manifest flaws, how she has consistently acted against the interests of the American people, that makes me a Trumpanzee. Okay. Well, I'm not a Trumpanzee, but I have to say this is pretty hilarious. And I don't think no one even buys it. I mean, I'm sure they're just laughing their asses off, the ones who put this together, not taking it seriously. So, no, not the symbol of hope, truth, justice, or the American way. And I don't even think his followers. Look at Elon, right? His bestie is now turned totally against him, and rightly so. Rightly so. By the way, one of the points about how Elon's going after Trump, calling him corrupt, and how this is ridiculous, how absurd it is that there's this announcement, which we all know is ludicrous, that somehow, what was it? It's about Epstein. There's no client list. Okay, well, I love that because there's no client list. Okay, and it's like they think we're so stupid, as though we believe that because they say there's no client list, Epstein didn't actually have identified a lot of his clients, people who would pay him as a panderer, as a procurer of underage girls to have sex with. Of course he knew who they were. Of course he had, it down somewhere. Maybe it wasn't like officially a list, like on a yellow ruled paper that said list at the top, underline, with a squiggly line. Maybe he didn't have that list in that format, but obviously he knew that who his clients were, who he took down to that island of his, Pedo Island. So, Elon going after Trump for that and saying how he betrayed his supporters. And he did. There's no question about it. this is, by the way, one of the reasons that I don't like generally demonizing people. I demonize policy. I mean, at some point, right, you can't separate, right? I mean, torture Dick Cheney is a torturer. Liz Cheney, by defending her father, by consistently supporting the worst Trump policies, and even going beyond, making him even worse, because she was urging him when he would talk to her during his first administration, she would be urging him constantly to be bombing people and going to war, which I believe, that's what he said. I'm sure that's true. So, at some point you look at these people and say, these are really bad people. We don't want to be on their side. But in the end, what matters is policy. And are there policies, in a particular case, I can ally with you. So I would ally with Elon Musk to say, yeah, let's get the list out. Let's get the names. If you don't want to call it a list, let's get the names of the people that went to Pedo Island, who procured underage girls, sex with underage people. I assume they're all women, girls, females. I don't know. Maybe that isn't the case. As far as I know, there weren't boys trafficked, but there may have been, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's come out. I don't know. So again, policy is what mattered. If you recognize the climate catastrophe, then let's work together to stop it. And if you don't, if you're a denier, even if I've agreed with you in the past, like I have with Jimmy Dore, no, that's terrible that you're trying to make fun of those who are trying to change the trajectory of our planet in terms of burning fossil fuels. And like a great example of that is Greta Thunberg. Now, he made fun of Greta to Jimmy, who is a great activist, one of the most important people in the world when it comes to educating us as to this climate catastrophe, the ecocide that we're committing. And Jimmy made fun of her because at one point, and he kind of turned on her. I don't think he ever warmed up to Greta Thunberg. For whatever reason, he maybe was jealous of all the attention she got. I don't know. I can't get into people's heads. But, he would mock her because, at least starting out with where she wrongly supported the war against Russia, the proxy war, rather than pushing for peace. She condemned Putin without recognizing the complexities of that conflict. Now, of course, Putin deserves a lot of condemnation, but to just reflexively say we have to defend Ukraine, we need to support Ukraine, was wrong, and she should have known it was wrong. So, of course, we get things wrong, but she gets a lot right too, and she's been right 100% on the climate ecocide that we're practicing, specifically by burning fossil fuels. So I know the deniers are going to look at that headline and say, oh, it's the third warmest. It's getting cooler because the two hottest years were 24 and 23, right? I'm pretty certain that's right. I didn't go to look at it, but I'm almost certain June 23 was the second hottest and June 24 was the hottest on record. We had like 15 straight months where each month was the hottest month ever for that month, right? So you'll hear people say, see, it's getting cooler. Yes, last year's June was hotter, so therefore it's getting cooler, right? That's the argument without any, recognize there is going to be some vicissitudes. Temperatures aren't 100% every day, every week, every month determined by the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. But in fact, it continues to rise, and we will continue to see temperatures rise as a direct result of those increased concentrations. But if there are going to be some deniers, the fact is we continue to burn our mother up. I talked about this. I talked about earlier this week why we needed to impose a fossil fuels tax on every form of fossil fuels. And I got some comments on that. I got a comment from a friend of Halitics, and I hope they'll join me on the program. And I want to respond to some of their comments. They're not really criticism, but just some areas where maybe there's a little bit of a difference. But some of the comments that they make are very, very common. Or I won't say common, but I've heard these before, and I think they're very fair. But I think they also there is a response to them that I think ultimately, in my view, carries the day. The day that, yes, A fossil fuels tax isn't the only answer, but it's a huge, let me say it this way. If there's one answer, it would be a fossil fuels tax. But there are other challenges we face besides simply the ecocide caused by the greenhouse effect. There are other problems we face. They may be related. They may be intersectional, like obviously we talked about this with Jay yesterday. The war on the people of Gaza is devastating to the environment. The Ukraine war is devastating to the environment. So those wars are making the climate catastrophe even worse. They're, exacerbating the cataclysm. It's true, but they're also separate issues, even without the fact, even if you take out the impact they have on the environment, which is bad, they're still bad in and of themselves. So we have to do something about endless war as well as about the climate catastrophe. We have to do something about inequality, which also exacerbates the climate catastrophe. But the fossil fuels tax, in my opinion, without doing anything else, a fossil fuels tax ultimately could arrest the ecocide, it certainly could. Ecocide is caused by more than just hotter and hotter temperatures, also by, habitat infringement, where there's less wilderness areas, there's less room for other species. So that's a huge part of it. But in terms of simply addressing the climate crisis, yes, I believe a fossil fuels tax without anything else would solve it. And I also believe that nothing else can solve it, can address it. So we do need the fossil fuels tax, and we need other things too. So here's what the commentator said. I enjoyed the show. Thanks for engaging me. Sorry I couldn't call in. A carbon tax is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't address the root cause of our accelerating ecological predicament, which is our single-minded allegiance to endless economic and population growth. And then they go on to say, environmental economists will tell you that all we need is to get the price signals right through internalizing the cost of externalities. But then they challenge that. Now, I don't fully accept that the root cause of our accelerating ecological predicament is our single-minded allegiance to endless economic and population growth. That's a huge part of it. And I think we have to address that. But it's growth by virtue of increasing consumption of energy, specifically fossil fuels. So that is the root cause. The root cause is increased consumption of fossil fuels. But yes, even if we weren't using fossil fuels at all, even if we completely stopped using them, which we did, right? Up until probably the 1700s, there was no fossil fuel use, or virtually none. I guess some people might have extracted some coal. I don't really know. But basically, we didn't burn petroleum, we didn't burn natural gas, we didn't burn coal until the mid to late 1700s, as I understand it. We used wood. That was the primary fuel source, was wood. And wood is not a fossil fuel source because it's a renewable. You grow, for every piece of wood you burn, you have to have a tree that you grow, and the tree grows and consumes as much CO2 as it emits when you burn it. It has to, because the CO2 that's in the wood that's burned had to got into the wood in the first place, and that was when the tree absorbed it as the tree was growing through, I guess, photosynthesis. I could be wrong about that. Basically, that's how that all works. So no, wood is not a fossil fuel. It's not good to burn a lot of wood. It's not good to burn down forests. It's terrible, causes all sorts of problems. But as long as you keep replenishing your supply of wood, which we're not doing, then you have a net zero carbon fossil fuel footprint. Growth is a terrible problem. I mean, no question. We have to figure out how to make do with less and to stop and to consume less and less. But to stop burning fossil fuels, yeah, a tax will do it. It absolutely, ultimately, if you just keep raising the price of fossil fuels, at some point people will stop consuming it. You can price something to a point where it's no longer profitable to manufacture. Just price it to a point where it costs more to extract. The costs of extraction are greater than what you can sell it for. And what you can sell for is obviously the price to the consumer less the tax. So if it's $100 a gallon because of a tax, or there's a $98 tax on the gasoline, and it costs you $2.50 to manufacture 1 gallon, and the most you can sell it for and sell it is $100, and there's a $100 tax, you can't make money, you lose money, you don't produce it. That's the end of it. So yeah, you can price something to a point where people will no longer produce it, will no longer consume it. So the tax can indeed stop us from burning fossil fuels. Now, there's more to it. So I just think that's just clear. And we've seen it. We have stopped. There are many items we don't use anymore because they're just too expensive. We don't use whale oil, right? Too expensive. Costs too much. And you can get something cheaper. Well, you can have cheaper sources of fuel than fossil fuels if you raise the price through a tax. And that's what we should do. Now, there's lots of things. Plenty of foods that we don't eat, or plenty of various items that, mainly because we've made them so scarce. Does anyone even eat caviar? I guess there's a tiny little bit left, but there's not many sturgeon. And the Caspian Sea is so polluted, you can't really get those big fish anymore that you get the eggs out of. So the price has reached a point where it basically no longer is consumed. Now, if you raise the price via a tax rather than simply market pressures, then you really, really stop its consumption, because the price gets to a point where no one will buy it because of the tax. And there's no incentive to produce. Now, there were a couple of other points I want to just get to about why I believe, and I want to respond to why these comments, because I think they really get to why I'm so, I don't want to say optimistic about a fossil fuels tax. I would be. I mean, if I was the chief economist of the world and I could just simply impose it, I would be very optimistic about it. But these are some of the comments that I think need to be responded to, and maybe we'll show again why I believe the fossil fuels tax is so important, but we'll never get it. The benefits, my commenter says, of a fossil fuels tax break down if we apply tax mechanism across the board for environmental harm. So they're saying, hey, it's not just about taxing fossil fuels, there's other issues as well. So, for example, what's worse, oil or cobalt? I guess we use cobalt right in the process of solar arrays, solar panels, batteries. What's worse, the cobalt that is extracted with child labor in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, or oil? Well, I mean, I guess the answer to who determines taxes would be either voters directly, which we probably wouldn't have a direct tax, or we elect really good, really responsible, intelligent leaders who appoint some kind of a board that makes these decisions, right? Like a Federal Trade Commission or some other entity or entities tasked with this responsibility. In the end, it's a democrat. If we live in a democracy, the people will either decide directly or much more likely appoint, vote for people who will make that decision. But my answer would be they both should be super high, right? With regard to the fossil fuels. And I'm not really concerned about getting the price exactly right. Who knows what the externalities of our burning fossil fuels is so tremendous. Maybe you say, well, 1 gallon of oil, of petroleum, gasoline doesn't do a lot of harm. True. But millions, billions does incalculable harm, irreparable harm. So there's really no price that's too high, in my opinion. So what if it's not a perfect pricing mechanism? As long as it gets us to consume less and less and less, that's a good mechanism. And then with regard to the cobalt mine with child labor, well, this goes to the issue of tariffs more than anything else. I think we should impose tariffs on, and I've said this, tax the bads, right? Imported goods. We should impose tariffs on products from other countries, especially other countries where labor is exploited, so that we don't buy it. We don't use that. We don't use those resources. The tax should be very high for both. I don't know that we need to have a perfect, ratio between the two. I don't know that that's crucial. That's a good reason. That's a big reason, though, why the tax or tariffs are much better than some kind of government incentive system. Because when you have government incentives, when you're giving out grant money, when you're giving tax breaks, then you do want to be, I think you do want to be pretty precise and make sure you're giving the right incentives. You're incentivizing the use of, say, earth energy, right? Geothermal, because it's the best it's the cleanest, right? You want to be really careful about that. But if you're using taxes, then the market will make the decision. The market will decide what's the most efficient way to generate clean, green energy. As long as you tax the pollutants, as long as you tax the energy that is polluting, then the market will make a decision over time about the most efficient way to produce energy. And then they go on to say, all of that. Do we go back far enough in the supply chain to tax the fossil fuels used to make the massive amounts of steel that goes into building wind turbines? Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if wind energy requires the consumption of a lot of fossil fuels just to get those windmills online, then a fossil fuels tax would be the best way to incentivize the market to rely upon, to exploit energy sources that don't require a lot of fossil fuels to get them online. If building a house where you have a large basement and heat pumps and heat sinks and all of that requires far less fossil fuels than giant wind turbines, then the tax would be the most efficient way, the most effective way of getting us there. So I think the arguments that are presented here are actually very, very strong arguments for a fossil fuels tax. Because rather than, again, government bureaucrats who are often, corrupted, right? Because the decisions that they make can make or break a big company and put millions and millions of dollars in one person's pocket as opposed to another. If you give a contract to one, solar power generating company versus another, you're making or breaking that company. So that's a problem. But you don't have that problem if you just impose taxes on the consumption of fossil fuels. And if one solar power generator is a much more efficient producer and uses far less fossil fuels to produce the solar energy than the other, then they'll be the winner. The winner will be the one that's the most efficient and most effective. And the winner will also be between different energy sources. If you have 3 different energy sources, wind, solar, and geothermal, and they're all potentially, competitive in a particular market, well, the one that can produce the most energy at the smallest cost will win. And if wind turbines, because of all the steel in them, require a lot of fossil fuels, then they probably will lose, because the market will say, no, that's more expensive. It costs more. We can do it cheaper. We can sell for less. We can underprice you and we'll win in the marketplace. So again, the tax works extremely well. So compare that to a situation where you have bureaucrats who really may be well-meaning, who are not particularly corrupt, who are not going to be moved by the blandishments of a corporate titan who, flashes a big wad of bills in the face of some bureaucrat and says, hey, give me the contract and this is yours. No, let's say they really are honorable, decent people who want to make the best decision for their community. And they're trying to decide, who should we give the contract to? Should we give it to who should we give the grant to? Who should we give the incentive to build, to produce energy for us? Do we want to go with the wind? Do we want to go with the solar? Do we want to go with the geothermal? And there's so many different factors you got to look into, just like our commentator said. Well, one of them is, how much fossil fuel energy does it require just to build the array in the first place, the array of solar panels, the wind turbines, or putting, the whatever is used. I don't really know how geothermal works, but putting stuff underground. That's one factor. How much fossil fuels do we need to use to start the project? Then once the project is online, how much fossil fuels are we going to need to use to keep it online? What is it, just a one-time cost? You build the wind turbines, you buy the blades, and yeah, there's a lot of fossil fuels in the production of the blades, but then once they're there, they just spin and you don't have to use any fossil fuels, or is there a lot more fossil fuels? I don't know. These are just all these different factors. Which is going to produce more energy, over time, per hour? Which is going to require the least amount of maintenance? There's so many little details that you have to look into if you're a bureaucrat trying to choose the winner, the best energy source for your community. You don't have to do any of that if you just tax the damn fossil fuels. If you just tax them and you make them higher and higher and higher, well, then the producers of the clean green energy will be the ones who will have to make all those calculations and make the decision as to which is the most efficient. And if they screw up, well, guess what? They're not going to be competitive. They're going to lose out. So nothing works as well. Now, some people don't like when I go into these market discussions because they say, well, this is capitalism and capitalism is the problem. We're transactional animals. This is a point I made. This is what we do. Humans have been trading forever. That's part of what it is to be a human, is you specialize, right? That's what made us human. And we came out of the trees and we went out on the savannah and we started hunting animals, and some of us would sit there and think about it. Well, which is the best way? Should we stake them out at the water hole? Is that where we'll be in the best place? Or we have to compete with the lion if they're at the water hole? So whereas other people are going to, fashion a spear, and then others are going to lead the hunt. They're going to be people who are going to cook the animal that you kill. So that's what we do. We've evolved to be transactional. You do this, I'll do that. We killed this giraffe. I don't really like giraffe, but the tribe over there got a zebra. So let's swap a little bit of giraffe for a little zebra, right? So that's what we do. This is part of being human. Now, you don't want to call it capitalism. I understand aggregating all the capital and investing it in limited liability. Those are all very problematic, and we may need to come up with different ways of financing enterprises, and we certainly need to stop the growth. But we also do need a market to incentivize us to make smart economic decisions, especially when we live in an incredibly complicated world that isn't just a bunch of small groups of hunting bands consisting of a few families in each one, or maybe just one family. That's not the world we live in. We live in this incredibly complex, interconnected world. And yeah, we need markets to help us decide what to produce and what not to produce. Now, that said, yeah, we do have to contract, and we have to contract in a way that leads to the least amount of pain. But I don't see why a tax isn't that the best way to do that. You can start with a tax at a relatively low level, like maybe only 100% of the cost. Like what, a gallon of gas now is $3.50, $4, whatever it is. So you double it. If we had $8 a gallon gasoline right now, we would start consuming a lot less. And the price still wouldn't even be what it is in Europe, where people are living decent lives. You know, they have enough. That would start reducing consumption. And then you return, as I've said many times, you have to return the money to the people, especially poor Australian working people, so their quality of life isn't destroyed. In fact, their quality of life would improve if you did that, because they consume less per capita than rich people do. But this seems to me, I really haven't heard, and maybe I'm missing something. The best argument I've heard against a fossil fuels tax is that in the end, it wouldn't generate enough money for the poor, struggling, working people, because what would happen is wealthier people who consume a lot more would be in a much better position to start reducing their consumption. They would build much more efficient homes. They would use less gasoline. And that might happen. And then there wouldn't be enough paid into the tax to defray the pain that's inflicted on poor Australian working people. And if, to the extent that happens, you just keep looking at more and more ways to raise more money from rich people. You have to keep raising their taxes. I personally don't think that would happen. I don't ever envision a situation where fossil fuels taxes lead to rich people consuming less fossil fuels than poor. And as long as rich people consume more fossil fuels than poor people per capita, if you return the money that's collected, the revenues to the people, poor people will be relatively better off. I don't ever envision a situation where people who live in 8, 10, 12-room mansions, who, like the Obamas, have 3 homes, right? 4 homes, who fly places on their private jets, they're always going to be consuming more energy. Have not looked in my comments. Let me see if there are any. I hope there are some. I don't know. It says video is unavailable. Why is that? I think it's my old video. I presume I'm streaming. I hope I'm streaming. Let's see if I can find it. 240-242. Yeah, I'm streaming. It's just I was at the... Am I now? There we are. Yes. So let's see. Do we have any comments? Took me a lot. Yes. Good to see you, Ari. Thank you for the Palestine flags. Love those flags. Glad we're going out there, and see if I can hear myself. I'm not hearing myself, which is not what but there must be some reason for that. I can't believe I'm not going out. 240-242-5646. Huh. Is there a problem? What is going on here, folks? Probably should have checked this a while ago. We'll get everything straightened out just because I've been going for a while, but I know I'm live. I just know it. There we are. Yeah, I can see it. Yes, there's audio. So just a little tick-tock tick there. Excuse me. I thought this was very interesting, this trial of the century. There's we go. That's where I'm. Oh, why is that not? Very frustrating to me that I'm not seeing my audio. This was interesting in the New York Times. This story kind of caught my eye, caught my attention. The trial of the century. So that is the Scopes, very famous Scopes monkey trial from the 1920s. There was a play, you may remember it, Inherit the Wind, that talks about this. And it was called the trial of the century, with great lawyers, the 2 great lawyers who were involved, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was more of a politician, I think, than a lawyer, although he must have been a lawyer, and he decided to take the case on behalf of the state of Tennessee, which was prosecuting a young man who was a teacher, 24-year-old John Scopes, who had taught evolution. And that was in violation of the laws of the state of Tennessee. And he was prosecuted for that. And so there were, a lot of various factors relating to that. And this article by Kazin talks about why this conflict, which was kind of between the rural and the urban, right? Because the urbanites, the city folks, represented by H.L. Mencken. I've talked about him before, very snarky, very glib, good writer, but kind of a jerk. They were mocking these folks. They treat them like they were fools. They were country bumpkins. They were boobs, and and you sort of see the same issue in terms of like the social justice warriors saying, "Oh, how these people, what are they? They deny evolution. That's how they are." And so Kazin is saying, "Hey, we shouldn't be making fun of these people. It was wrong then. It's wrong now." And even as, fair, I think it is fair to say ignorant, right? Because they rejected evolution, even though they were ignorant, at least when it comes to science, rejecting evolution, which we know is true. What Kazin is saying is, these are people that maybe we don't agree with them on science, but we can win them over. They can be our, by the way, thanks, sorry for clarifying. I'm sounding and looking fine. I wonder why that's muted. I must have done something. In any event, what Kazin is saying is that we should still reach out to these people. And this is what I say. Of course, we should be reaching out to MAGA. Remember I did the program where I played the jank arguing with, I can't remember who it was, but he just humiliated them. They were like, why should we reach out to these people? And Jenks said, well, do you want to win? And of course, that's the answer. They're human beings. They're voters. You can reach out to them on issues that are important to you, that you do think are relevant in their lives, and they may agree. So what Kazin is saying is if Democratic politicians propose today's Democrats propose economic programs as ambitious as Bryan's, because in the 1890s, William Jennings Bryan was a populist. He was a very, very economically minded populist. He talked about free silver. That was his platform, that free silver would reduce the dollar, the value of the dollar, and this would really help the farmers, the strapped farmers, who were facing, very high prices. And so more dollars would raise prices, but by having more money in circulation, it would increase demand for their products. So farmers wanting to, it wasn't about the prices that they paid were too high and nobody could purchase their items. So free silver was their policy mantra at that time. And Bryan was, all for the farmer and all against the financiers, the Wall Street big shots, the big corporations. So what Kazin is saying is, hey, even if you don't agree with the country folk, the rural people who, to be honest, are probably, are wrong on some really important issues, are wrong on some social justice issues, are wrong when it comes to science, but their lives matter. And they may be right on other issues, like, for example, they're right about tariffs. And what Kazin is saying is if today's Democrats propose the kind of economic programs that William Bryan did and recognized the suffering in the heartland and acknowledge that there are real moral virtues in sacred tests, which I agree that there are many, then instead of mocking religion, now there's certain aspects of it I think we should challenge. And depending on how, devout people are and how fundamentalist they are. But look, there are plenty of religious crackpots everywhere. And there are plenty of people who aren't particularly religious in the heartland and as everywhere else. But what Kaysen's saying is, hey, don't make fun of people. Don't challenge them. Don't become outraged if they say something you don't agree with. But let's talk about need. Let's talk about economic security. Let's talk about justice. If you did that, if you recognized that they are suffering as a result of the economic policy that you championed, then you can win. This is what we talked about with Arlen as well. There's no vision from AOC. There's no acknowledgement that the policies that her party has propounded has hurt people. And that's why they don't win. It's just that simple. Get more. So Kaysen points out that the liberal areas of this country, the blue areas, are the wealthier areas. And so there's a tremendous amount of resentment, as is totally understandable. The income of rural people lags routinely behind that of city dwellers. And a big problem is losing union jobs. And he says extractive industries like coal. Well, we shouldn't be burning coal. But if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, from mining, we got to make sure we build good jobs in those areas. And he points out, even when Democrats pass a bill that's pretty good, like the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, they backload the benefits, so people don't feel them. They don't get the benefit in the end. And of course, they're resentful and angry at the Democrats for promising and not delivering. It's perfectly correct. And yeah, seems also without any argument whatsoever, beyond any peradventure. They resent prosperous urbanites and metropolitan politicians who appear to blame them or at least not care about their plight. Of course. Why is any of this even remotely controversial? Why would Democrats push back ever against candidates, nominees even like a Mamdani, who appeal to millions by talking economic populism? Why would you ever push back? Unless you're corrupt, unless you don't care about the people, unless you're resentful of their demands for a better life, which is exactly today's Democratic Party. Describes it to a T. Rural and small town voters may appreciate the talk, and what Kaysen is saying is, hey, this may not work. Even if the party became truly pro-worker, pro-poor, pro-struggling, pro-middle class, even if the party became a pro-consumer, pro-person, pro-life party, they still might not win because there's so much anger, there's so much hatred towards, there's so much distrust. It's true. But Kaysen also points out that they still voted for FDR in the end. The Scopes trials in 24, FDR won in 32. Then he throws this out there, though. Barring another economic calamity like the Depression, the Great Depression under the Republican Party's watch, the cultural divide may not be bridgeable. Well, I think that's utterly absurd. We've already seen Republicans bridging racial gaps, right? Ethnic gaps, with more black men voting for them than in the past, for Trump, no less. Latinos voting for Trump in greater numbers than we've seen in any recent election for a Republican, including for George W. Bush, who did pretty well with Latinos all said and done. So I don't agree that there's a cultural divide that's unbridgeable in any way. I don't say that it will be bridged, but it can be. And Kaysen says it might require another Great Depression. But here's the thing. We're already living millions, tens of millions of Americans are already living incredibly desperate lives. They're already barely making it at all. We already are living in economic calamitous times. It's true that voters may not only blame Republicans or may not primarily blame Republicans for this, but the times are calamitous. And a truly progressive populist message will find a very, very willing audience, a very eager audience, as Bernie did, to everyone's surprise in 2016, as Zoran Mamdani did this year. So this is the way Democrats have to move forward. Well, probably not, because it's not in the interest of the leaders of the Democratic Party for them to do that. It's not in their interest economically, because they get tons of money. They're doing incredibly well. They're elite. They're privileged. So reducing wealth and income inequality would actually reduce the privileges of the Democratic leadership class, the Schumers, the Hakeem Jeffries, the Bidens, the Harrises. They're doing extremely well. The solution to the economic woes and the political woes besetting the Democratic Party is to reduce the privileges enjoyed by the leaders of the Democratic Party. So no, they're not going to support that. And it's not to their benefit even politically to support wealth and income redistribution, because if the Democratic Party embraced the agenda that AOC claims to support, if they embrace the agenda that the squad says it believes in, then the leadership would be completely voted out, right? If you had enough Democrats to say we're going to stop funding Israel, if you had enough Democrats to say we're going to raise top marginal tax rates and tax Wall Street where it belongs, you think they're going to choose those people, those politicians would vote for Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer to be their leaders? I don't think so. Would they support Kamala Harris? Would a pro-peace Democratic Party ever support a Kamala Harris to be their nominee for president? Of course not. So the Democratic leadership will do everything in its power, which is considerable, to prevent the party from embracing the messages that will win, that could win, that should win. We're in a really tough spot. It's a conundrum, folks. They should try. But in the end, and if they did, if they really truly embraced populism, if the vision they presented, if in their fighting oligarchs tour, Bernie and AOC had gone on stage and said, we're going to start taxing those billionaires. Trust me, we've got to vote for only candidates who will raise their taxes. And Bernie and I are going to go out there and we're going to identify people who are going to be committed to clawing back the wealth and the income that they've stolen from you. And by the way, this means we have to primary Democrats. If AOC had said that, that would have been a wildly popular fighting oligarchy tour. Instead, it went over like a lead balloon. If she was committed to working people, she never in a billion years would have said Mark Kelly and Rafael. Grijalva's the old one who died. Gallego. Grijalva was in Congress. He wasn't a senator. I always get Ruben Gallego. She never would have said in a million years. If she was committed to the working class, she wouldn't have been a million. If she was committed to peace, if she was committed to staying up to the Zionist lobby, she wouldn't have in a million years said that Gallego and Kelly are great senators. And that's why the Democratic Party is not going to do what it should do. Now, I just want to make this final point about AOC too, because in this response to the kind of discussion Arlen and I had about the Democrats' failure to enunciate a vision for a better America, and that's what Kazin was saying is, hey, you want to win? Tell working people, tell rural Americans, this is what you're going to do to make life better for them. But they won't do that. And Arlen pushed back and he said, no, they progressives argue on policy too. So this article I thought was very interesting because remember when AOC was passed over, she was snubbed for a dead man. He's dead now. He wasn't dead then, Jerry Connolly. He was dying though. He was in terrible health. You could just look at him. He looked awful. A 74-year-old Jerry Connolly picked to lead over AOC. And this was by a very significant vote margin, 50 plus votes in the Democratic Party was for Connally over AOC. He won by over 50 votes. But what was her message even then? Her message wasn't the Democratic Party needs to embrace populism. The Democratic Party needs to embrace working class values. The Democratic Party has to embrace equality and peace. That wasn't her message. Her message wasn't, as House Oversight ranking Democrat, I'm going to be very, very willing to look at both Republican and Democratic corruption. I'm going to look at policies that must be implemented to ensure that politicians are focused on making the best policy choices objectively, independently of what financiers, donors want. That was the message she should have run on. Now, would she have won? Probably not. But you take that to the people. She lost anyway. So really, her message, she lost because they don't trust her. Because no matter how much she bends the knee, no matter how much she genuflects to Mama Bear and Democratic leaders, they don't trust her. What was her message, though? Her message wasn't populism. Her message wasn't let's be the people's house. Her message was we need generational change. Well, generational change is great if the new generation is better than the old one. That's the only reason. That's nothing that's going to excite or jazz people. Generational change, there's no policy embedded in that. That's why, in the end, not that she lost, she would have lost no matter what, but that's why the American people aren't rallying around her. That's why she's not. I mean, you never know. Look, the Republicans are so bad. Who knows? Maybe an AOC could generate excitement. We've seen it before. But in the end, nothing isn't going to beat something. And even when it does, we don't get anything out of it. We don't benefit from it. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me. You all have a great weekend. I will be back Monday, and we'll have an Arlen Tuesday. And Carlos, friend of Halitics, Carlos will be on Friday of next week.